So, like I said, it's kind of exciting to have both of them here with us. We tend to, down in mainland Europe and the rest of the world, consider the Nordics as just kind of those guys up north, and we think of them all as one big entity. But in reality, you have some very unique and different situations with respect to the environment and the policies that are made. So I was just hoping that you guys could start by giving us a little bit of information about your respective associations, and then as well come back to how you ended up here together with us today.
Yes. Thank you for letting us having us here. The Norwegian Hydrogen Association has existed for 22 years, and it's been a growing community in Norway with more and more companies joining. And the last years it's been really great with more and more public entities, new markets like the maritime industry, other industrial interests joining in. So it's really great, yeah.
That's fantastic. Do you have a rough idea of how many members you have within your association?
We have around 55 members, and we do experience a lot of interest for new members, yes.
Thank you. And anything on Hydrogen Sweden, please?
Yeah, we have existed in 13 years this year, and we are also 55 members. And what's a bit unique is that we have both from the public sector and from the private sector, and also the academy involved. So we have all three parts. It's a terrible noise background now, so really it's probably hard to hear us. Maybe we speak louder. So we've been up running for a while. We see a growing interest. We see more energy companies getting involved in the business.
Okay, so each of you have many companies, public and private, both associated in there within your own countries. But what prompted the decision to be here together?
Yes, we have been cooperating for it's 13 years now with the Scandinavian Hydrogen Highway Partnership. As you can see now on the map, it really consists of the 5 Nordic countries with Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland and Finland. So that partnership started up in 2006. And from that point, our national organizations have been cooperating through different projects to develop an aligned commitment for using hydrogen, mainly in transportation. And the last year now, we have engaged to ramp up and think more strategically how this Nordic region can work even stronger together.
What would you say the primary goals of this organization are?
Well, it's mainly a cooperation, and if we go back in the history, we can see that we haven't been competing really. There's been electrolyzers in Norway, refueling stations in Denmark, and fuel cells in Sweden. So the business sector has really been completing each other. What we did last year was also to create an advisory board of members from the industry to support the board and for us to get deeper knowledge into the real industry.
Okay, and the name of this project is the Scandinavian Highway Project. So is it mostly focused on mobility?
Yes, it started up with mobility in personal cars. And on the map, you can see the status of stations in Nordic countries now. By the end of this year, will be 23 stations throughout the countries. And there has been various demonstration projects the last 10 years that have gained ground for the situation we're in now. And now we're talking about moving from light-duty cars to heavy transportation trucks, maritime applications, and all the industrial opportunities arising.
Great, thank you. So maritime applications is something that I think everyone is particularly interested in when we talk about hydrogen in the Nordics, since that's something that's fairly unique compared to the rest of the world. You guys have a lot of water up there, long coastlines, and as well as the environmental needs for that and the need for the water, there's a bunch of policies in place to try to keep everything green in maritime stuff. Could you speak a little bit to the differences we see between both countries and sort of the current state of affairs there?
Yes. Although the Nordic countries are fairly similar when it comes to development as a region in the world, if you look at the geography, it's quite a big difference because, for instance, Norway has a very long, short shoreline, and of course we have a lot of maritime activities that has existed for centuries. While Sweden being a more you have the Baltic Sea region, which of course also is important on the maritime side, but still you have other kinds of industries, and this has led to different pathways from our governments and what they are prioritize. So, for instance, in Norway, it's been a very strong focus now on decarbonizing the transport sector and to use public procurement to drive that force. So fortunately, we're in a situation where the roads administration is using their mandate to push the zero-emission ferry development, first from battery electric and now on to hydrogen. So that's really exciting.
I can step in for the industry in Sweden. We see the focus on the green hydrogen. We have all countries such very good conditions for making renewables, and we see that this is a driving force. And often we can hear that, well, it will be too expensive to have green hydrogen in the industry. And that's not really true, because we already have some quite big companies with a high usage of hydrogen, and it's purely green. So it's a business already today.
What sort of sources are you getting the green hydrogen from up in Sweden?
Well, you do it from wind power, water power, and then the solar power is coming very quickly as well. So, and that is when you use the electrolysis process. But we also have a lot of biofuels, especially biomethane, and the reforming of the biomethane will also lead to a green hydrogen.
Okay, so we have differences in resources as well as differences in needs. I think I read recently that some of the fjord areas are hoping to have zero emissions within the next couple of years. So, of course, this will change the maritime sector and what is not allowable.
Yes.
I was just going to say that these policy changes are somewhat interesting because although you guys have a partnership with the rest of the Nordic countries, you are not both members of the EU. So some are held to a different standard, but it does not necessarily mean that it's better or worse, simply different. How do you find that those two different, potentially different viewpoints contribute to your own personal mandates or your association's mandates?
Well, we always try to get Norway into EU when we work, but there are several programs where Norway actually can join the EU projects. It's a few of them where they can't join, but it's more programs where you actually do join.
Yeah, that's true.
So that is really not blocking. But as you said, we have very different tax systems, and the incentives are very different. We see maybe more similarities between Denmark and Norway in the incentives.
Could you give me some examples of these types of incentives?
You can take your tax system.
In Norway, we have the benefit of buying fuel cell electric cars as well as battery electric cars without taxes. You can drive in public lanes. You could used to be able to ride on the ferries for free for the battery electric cars, but that now's been taken away because we have 200,000 battery electric cars, and this is growing fast. And but still, the incentives for hydrogen vehicles will be kept in place at least until 2025. So these are really great incentives that we can still work on for the deployment of fuel cell vehicles.
Yeah, it sounds interesting that you guys have all these incentives, but I actually read just this morning that in March, Norway had more than 50% of its new car sales as electric vehicles. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean fuel cell vehicles, of course, just simply electric, but at that sort of rate, if you expect to continue to see this growth, then this level of subsidy and incentive seems somewhat unsustainable.
Yeah, it's the battery electric vehicle success in Norway has that's here to stay, and everyone agrees on that. The good thing now is that we see that people are demanding more actions from the government, and that's why this the car ferry using hydrogen is one of the main important drivers for the government now. And that has also raised awareness for fuel cell technology for all kinds of mobility. So awareness is much higher now than a few years ago, and it's as long as we can get Asian and European car industry to move ahead and deploy more vehicles, that's gonna be important for the development in Norway.
Björn, are we seeing a similar trend of electric vehicles in Sweden as well?
Well, we see the trend, but our government has chosen not to work with incentives in that respect, so we see a much slower increase of the electrical cars. But the trend is very clear, and what we did instead was that we copied the French system, the bonus-malus. So we give a credit for the clean cars, the battery electric cars and the fuel cell cars will get 6,000 euros as a bonus. And then the high emitting cars, they will pay then a malus, a penalty of a scale up to very expensive if you have a high polluting car.
Okay, so we have slightly different methods, but both policies are certainly aiming to encourage increased use of greener energies with respect to mobility.
True, that's clear.
Right.
And we see one project over here in the Swedish pavilion that's called Hybrid, and that's the steel industry who will bring in hydrogen in the process, very early in the process. And if that is successful, they will cut the CO2 emissions with 10% in our country. So it's a very strong initiative.
Okay, I'm actually so glad that you mentioned that because it's not just the mobility sector that's so important for us to start decreasing emissions. If we really want to be making the types of changes that we're hoping to get, we need to start using hydrogen in other areas as well. What sort of projects are going on within your respective associations to encourage hydrogen use?
I'm trying to back here to the buildings. No, we see really this sectorial integration approach, and we see that we need to work together, the industry and the energy sector and the transportation sector. And this is a house from a guy who is here at the fair, Mr. Hans-Olof Nilsson. And this is an off-grid house. He produces his own electricity from the solar panels, and he's storing the energy in hydrogen. And this has been up running now for close to 4 years, very successful. And we see an upscaling of this now into more and more buildings, more and more apartments. And then we see the scale of economy that the investment is getting to a very attractive level.
Okay, actually Sweden has an apartment block that's run off some hydrogen, right? Something like a couple hundred units almost, is that right?
Excuse me, we have, could you repeat?
An apartment or a flat. You have actual people living in hydrogen-assisted heating. Is that right?
It's coming up in May. The first building with the 172 apartments with hydrogen will be up running. Yeah.
172 seems like quite a good first step. Thank you. At this point, do we have any questions from the audience before we continue? I can just bring the microphone down to you. Just put your hand up. Okay, well, if you think of any, we'll get back to it. All right, so I'd just like to continue on with our chat as well. So you guys have this project together. What are some of the next steps for the association? What are the goals looking forward from 2019?
As Jon André Løkke in El Hydrogen was just speaking about, trucks is coming up and becoming very important for the fuel cell development worldwide. And we've done some measurements now for the last year to prepare a good introduction for that in the Nordic countries. So actually we have a project now co-funded by Nordic Innovation to prepare a possible truck deployment for all the Nordic countries. In Norway, we have several operators of truck fleet that is preparing this already. Some are in order and some are pre-reserved, and this is going to grow. So we hope to align strategies between the Nordic countries to make sure that we have a highway that can sustain hydrogen transportation throughout all countries.
So you guys showed a map that showed that you have a network already for passenger cars, but heavy-duty commercial trucks have a somewhat different requirement with respect to how much fueling they really need. Are you ready for that increase in scalability or increase in scale?
I think it's important that we take the experience we have done from the cars and see that we not invent new systems with new pressure and new protocols, so you can really reuse as much as you can for cars and buses and trucks and also in the maritime sector. And we see now that it was announced that there is a new protocol being developed from some players, especially for the truck side.
Okay, thank you. Anything else to add? You looked like you had a thought.
Yeah, you mentioned the need of energy, and we have so much potential to use renewable energy to support growth in hydrogen transportation both on land and sea. So we see all kinds of great opportunities in this.
Okay, so ideally you have the resources to produce the green hydrogen and as well the capability to have to use that as well for your commercial sectors in trucking and in maritimes and in many other applications.
That's true. And I also think about the emission targets set now at the EU level. This will heavily influence the transport sector and what we have to achieve and show on the market. It points very much towards hydrogen. So this is what we need to step up. And we are just now waiting also for the directive for alternative fuels to be updated. It hasn't been that tough so far, but we will see what the update will lead to. That can really be some objectives that could be guiding us in what we need to do.
Okay. And of course, I am not myself Nordic nor even European, but my impression is that we tend to look to the Nordics as examples of clean energy and strong public support for all their people. What do you guys think is going to be happening? Do you think that it will be if you build it, the rest will follow, or will you be falling in with other people's mandates? I mean, of course, as well, like people like the Netherlands are always making things happen, but are you guys going to be pushing the boundaries?
We need to have development going in a different part of the world. We see that what's happening in Asia is important now with Japan, Korea, long-term players, and China is coming up, and they need to see demand growing in Europe so they can help push European development. And then we have the American development that's coming up, which again we will benefit from with the Nel cooperation with Nikola Motors. And then Nikola is also making this European truck model that will come in a few years' time. So we see that it's very important to collaborate internationally on this.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many applications if you go into the hydrogen society. So I can't see that one country or one market will be leading in all areas. There is plenty of room for anyone to make their own solutions and what is good for the country or for the region. And that's why we need this cooperation. I mean, it's not only the Scandinavian countries working together. We work heavily with all the European countries.
So we all need to work together to improve hydrogen use and in general clean up the energy so that we can reach all those mandates. All right. Well, thank you both so much for being here with me today. If there are any follow-up questions, you should visit both of these guys at their booths. You can find the Norwegian stuff is just over there. It is at booth B60, and Hydrogen Sweden is at booth B49, which is actually also in that direction. So you might as well hit up them both while you're at it. So thanks once again for being here with us today, and I hope you both continue to enjoy your time at the fair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.